Greetings and welcome back to CS133 Practical Programming with Python. This is week 3. We're on lesson manipulating list. So if you remember from last lesson, we talked about how to actually create a list, what it took to do that. Again, it's still just a variable. We're just allowed to add more than one item to it, which are called elements. So in this lesson, our objective is to understand how to manipulate those lists. Our success criteria is you'll demonstrate adding an item to a list and then printing all the items in a list. So I'm going to show you some different commands. The main one we're going to focus on is append. The main one we're going to focus on. We'll talk about some of the other ones, but the main one we're going to focus on is append. And you can Google if you need to know how to do anything else. Come back to this page as well to look at it. But one of the number ones things you're going to use, manipulations you're going to use, is append. So if you look at it as a reminder of what we did, list is what Python calls them. A lot of other programs call them arrays, but list is what Python calls them. And then in order to make a list variable, you add the square brackets. All right, you add the square brackets. So in this case, I'm adding two strings into this list. And then list will contain all of those items. All those items. If I wanted more items, I just comma and add another item, comma, add another item. However, what if during the part of the program you actually want to add stuff? So for example, you ask someone for some input and then you want to add it to the list you already have. Like, would you like to add a new item to the list? Yes. All right, add items to the list. And then now you have a new updated list that you made dynamically, right? This is hard-coded, this is it, this is standard, and technically this one right here is hard-coded, but you can add more features so it only adds it if this happens, or again, that makes it dynamic. So again, these lists can be full of whatever you want. You could be full of integers, i.e. numbers, you could have Boolean in there. You can have list of lists. That gets really complicated, but at the end of the day, you have a list, it contains elements. This is element, the first one is element 0, and then it goes up from there. So it's important to remember these start at 0. To append, you write the name of the append, name of the list you want to append, dot append, and then parentheses. And then whatever you want to add to it. So in this case, I'm adding another string, because I already have a string. You could just put a number in there. You could put a variable in there, depending on how you're writing this. But that's how you append. We'll go into more demonstration of this shortly. This sorts the list. This allows you to count, and this whole thing will become a number. So in this case, there's only one item 1. So this right here in this specific place would just be 1. This allows you to actually insert into a certain spot. And again, it's the index. So if it's 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, if you say 2, it's going to shift over and then put it right there. So that the spots that were in 2 and 3 will get shifted over to 3 and 4, and 2 will get. Don't use that a whole lot, but there are times you want to. So do know that these commands are out there. There might be times you need to use those. Google's a great spot to find them. But for now, we're just going to focus on trying to get through this. So I'm going to minimize this, make this a little bit bigger, and we'll do our good old fruit list. So we have apples, bananas, and pears. We talked about traversing through it with a for statement for I in range, the length of my list, and then you print my list I, and that's what gives us the apples, bananas, pears. Again, we went over that last time. That is not manipulation, that is just actually accessing it. The key with it, again, getting the length of the list. So this will go from 0 to the length, which is 0 to 2. Right? The length is 3. The length is 3, so 0 to 3. If you remember how this works, it goes up to 3, which works out perfectly. 0, 1, 2, up to the length, which is 3, and doesn't actually go to it. So therefore, we get 0, which is apples. Then it becomes 1, which is bananas, and then 2, which is pears, and then it's at the length and it's done. Now I'm going to show this real quick. There are times where you might want to do item in my list. So you can do, however you want to write this. A lot of times if you do something like, if this is fruits, you might do for fruit in fruits to let you know it's just one. If I print this, print item, I'm going to get the same results. So for item in my list, it's going to print item. In this case, notice I didn't need the I. That's just going to turn apples, bananas, and pears. And you can see I just ran it. It didn't actually change anything because this is printing apples, bananas, and pears. Want if for whatever reason we actually need to use I, there is no I, right? I can't be like, if I had a second list or whatever, I wanted to print what item I'm on, how many items are left. I don't have access to I very easily. So this is great if you just want to use that item. You want to check if apples in item is an item, but that's another way to write this. Just be careful with using that. All right, so print a new list. We're appending peaches. Remember, append just adds to the end. Append as end. Now we can still use the length mylist because that now is 4, so therefore it's going to go 0, 1, 2, 3, and stop at 4, which is apples, bananas, pears, and peaches. So that is how you append to it. There's other things, and there's even more than right here. There's a lot of different things you can do with a list. These are the most common, but this is probably one of the most commons, is actually just appending to it. So as we go through, we'll show you how to actually accept something and then use that. So take user input and then add that to a list. But for now, the key is it's whatever the name list is. So this could be, if this is fruit list, then this would be fruit list. It's just the name of the list, dot append, and then parentheses, and inside of that, that's what you're adding to it. So you can see it was apples, bananas, and pears. Now it's apples, bananas, pears, and peaches. Also, again, a good example of why length is so useful to there. And to let you know that you can do this, you might see this when you're working at it. Just realize you need to understand what it's doing is when you do for item in my list, it loops through my list. So that's kind of the beauty of the concept of how this helps us loop through it. The problem is you don't actually have I, right? So instead of my list I, you just have, so this is essentially the same as my list I, right? Item is essentially the same as my list I, but you can't print I. There are times when you need to print I. So apples is 0, bananas 1, right? So you can figure out what the index of it is. Especially if you wanted to delete something, right? If I said I want to find bananas and then delete bananas, and again there will be a delete command. If you want to find bananas and delete bananas, you find it and then you delete it. You can remove I. However, this doesn't give you access to I. So that's an example of, this is really nice for simple loops, but if you do need access to I, which is why you undoubtedly almost always see me write it this way, just in case I might need to use I. So with that, that is manipulating list. Next is our practice. We'll see you next lesson.